Hey, Brian, how's it going today? I
Uh,
know technology fails. We still have a year into pandemic.
I'm good, man. Thank you very much for hosting me today. I really appreciate the invite.
No, I'm looking forward to this conversation because I literally just feel like I know you through your writings. I've read so many articles you've written over the past quite a few years, and I enjoy all of them. But I wanted to learn a little bit more, so I figured I might as well dedicate some time to make you hang out with me on camera so we can, talk about you. And I think your initial response was a little funny when I said, Brian, let's do one of these. You came back to me and said, like, who is Bryan Roth? And I just thought that was kind of funny. And, what are your thoughts on taking a deep dive into your life?
This is like the worst kind of play date. I
mean, we don't even have beers in our hand.
To peel these onion-like layers and share in all of the pleasures and challenges we can all have together.
Well, I'm excited to dive in and see what happens. So as I was preparing for this, I do what I always do. I go to Google and see what I can find on someone. And so, I found that there's another Bryan Roth who calls college sports. I don't think that one's you. There's another one who's a professor at UNC Chapel Hill. I don't think that one's you. And I actually made the mistake. Your email is really simple. It's essentially your name at gmail.com with maybe a middle initial in there. I forgot one aspect of your email address, and I actually sent an email to another Bryan Roth. And that Bryan Roth, believe it or not, responded, and he accepted my invitation.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Hello there.
So when I sent out the invitation to join us for this conversation about Bryan Roth, I thought I'd get one, but I got two.
I don't know if you can see behind me too. We'll talk about this at some point. There's this poster behind me from another Bryan Roth in Athens, Georgia, in which I made a collaboration beer with last year. Brian, I'm sorry for being so rude. Who are you, Bryan Roth?
It's nice to meet you. It's funny because I have the brian.roth@gmail. So I get a variety of emails for other Bryan Roths on occasion. And when this one came through, I was like, hey, Andrew, I like beer, but I don't think I'm the Brian you're looking for. And so he wrote to me this morning. He's like, any chance you want to join in? I said, of course, just for the fun of it. It's always nice to meet another Bryan Roth.
Likewise.
Especially with the Y, Tell me this, when people ask, when you say, they ask you for your name, you say, my name's Bryan Roth. Isn't it nice when somebody says like, oh, is it a Y or an I? I always feel like I need to thank them. Like, oh, I realize it's unusual, but I appreciate you asking. So you must experience the same thing.
It makes me feel seen. Yeah.
Same here. Validates my parents' choice at some point quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
Now, as young children, did you think you'd meet other Bryan Roths in your life, or did this come as a complete surprise? I mean, it's a fairly unique name.
Yeah. Other Brian, where are you at right now?
I'm actually in Seattle. I didn't plan to wear this shirt in particular, but I'm out in Seattle, and I'm one of the co-founders of geocaching.
Oh, you're the geocaching Bryan Roth.
I'm the geocaching Bryan.
There we go. Okay, I know. So as luck would have it as well, my brother Josh Roth lives in Seattle.
Oh, right on.
I have to interrupt for a second. Brian, do you have a brother named Josh? Brian 2 or Brian 1? I don't know how to refer to you.
I do not. I have a brother named Matthew, who is a fishing boat captain out on the East Coast.
My brother
Bryan Roth in the center. I feel like you need to set your brother up with Seattle Bryan Roth for dinner tonight. This needs to be a
thing.
Post-COVID, of course.
Yeah,
yes.
I remember bringing this up. This was around the time that I was doing the collaboration beer with Bryan Roth in Georgia. That there is a Bryan Roth who we're speaking with in Seattle, where my brother lives. Here in North Carolina, literally in the same zip code, is the world-renowned biochemist professor Bryan Roth, who
the number one on Google Bryan Roth.
Yes.
I know. PhD Bryan Roth, I believe.
not PhD Bryan Roth.
Yeah,
This is so awesome. So here's the thing. I have like other media members. I have a Google alert set up for my name. So when I have stories come out or if I'm mentioned, I can pick that up. I get your name all the time. I usually get like, I think it was just a week or two ago, there was a flurry of coverage where you were in.
Oh, for the Mars rover.
Yes.
Yes. So the Mars rover, the what is it called? The configuration plate. The calibration plate for the Sherlock camera on the Mars rover was produced by NASA, of course, and produced specifically by a geocacher at NASA, who contacted us a few years ago and said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we made the Mars rover like trackable, like we have game pieces within geocaching? And so the word geocaching is now on Mars, which, you know, it's kind of cool. I didn't personally have anything to do with it, but it got a lot of coverage, and that's probably what you saw.
That's awesome.
Well,
I'm the third, like by far, it is UNC Bryan Roth, it is geocaching Bryan Roth, and that is beer Bryan Roth, like below on all those results that I get too.
I mean, listen, beer Bryan Roth is a pretty good deal. I would trade that for UNC PhD Bryan. No offense to whoever that is out there.
Yeah, he wasn't available today. I failed to send him an email, unfortunately.
If you could have got a few more Bryans, Andrew, we would have been really.
Yeah, we'll get a whole circle of Bryans, make a party out of it. You guys can do a collaboration beer together.
Oh man,
Seattle Bryan Roth, I really appreciate you tuning in for just a minute, coming to hang out with us. Hopefully we'll all get to hang out in person someday post-COVID.
Sounds good to me. Pleasure. Enjoy the interview. Thanks for inviting me.
We love geocaching as well.
Thanks, Bryan.
Thanks. Take care, Bryan. Nice meeting you. Cheers, you guys.
Cheers. Bryan, stop making me laugh. That's not very professional.
That's incredible. Thank you.
You know what? That was pretty incredible. I got the idea as I'm like, you know, brainstorming what I want to talk about today. I'm like, you know what? Let me see if other Bryan Roth is available. He seems pretty quick on the email, seems pretty witty. So I shot him that message. He responded back like near immediately. I'm like, hey, do you think you can come? He's like, I got a 4:30 meeting, but I can make it before. I'm like, fantastic. Here's the link. He didn't require any prep at all. That man knew what to do.
Some people just got it, you know?
Yeah, no, I like that Bryan Roth already. We're going to have to find a way to get him in the beer industry.
All right, I'll take it.
But now let's talk about the Bryan Roth I'm stuck with, because you're the one here. I guess it's time to, you know, start your therapy session up. So I want to go back to when you're a child, Bryan. I don't mean that to the therapy-like vibe, but I mean, like, I'm really interested in learning, because I know you as the beer writer. I know you do more in your life. You work at Duke University. You do a lot. But like when you were just a kid, did you grow up in North Carolina? And what was that, you know, afternoon like after school when you got off the bus, walked home? What did you do as a kid?
Yeah, I grew up in Geneva, New York, which I always classify when I tell people as upstate New York. I always make this hand gesture because people think of upstate New York as like Westchester, which is not. And then there's also like 11 different ways that people qualify a map of New York State. So anyway, I grew up in Geneva, New York, which for those who aren't familiar is basically equidistant between Rochester and Syracuse. And it wasn't until about 12 and a half years ago, I moved down to Durham, North Carolina. But yeah, I grew up there, went to school, went to college at Ithaca College, not far away for journalism. I'm one of those weird kids who knew fairly quickly what they wanted to do with their lives. I really wanted to be a sports broadcaster. And so from the time I was probably about 13 years old, I was kind of dead set on that's what I wanted to do. And I did radio sports broadcasting for about 7 years before I was doing some newspaper writing alongside that as well. And then I left newspapers altogether because that was just not the thing for me. But yeah, nothing too special out of the ordinary for my after school programming growing up, to be honest. It was, you know, I was not a nerdy kid, not a popular kid, played sports, not the cool sports, ran cross country track and I swam. Had good friends, some of which I'm very lucky to still be as close friends today. But yeah, like a lot of people who grew up in upstate New York, I got the hell out of Dodge when I could. I worked so I went to school at Ithaca, and I worked covering news in and around Rochester, New York, before I decided that newspapers were not going to be the thing for me. Ended up moving down to North Carolina when I got a job at Duke University. Had literally never been to the state of North Carolina before. But yeah, that's just one of the weird things about growing up in upstate New York. Like, I moved down here and I got twice as many days of sunshine, which has been an incredible game changer for quality of life and what I knew that to be. And it's just one of the unfortunate things. Like, it's like 10%. This stat has been consistent for years. Upstate New York, kids who grow up, go to high school in New York State, it's like upstate New York, it's like 10% actually stay after college. Like, it's not great. And so I was just one of the many. I'm a statistic in that way, where I'm one of many who just needed to leave because there were sunnier, greener pastures elsewhere.
I made that mistake myself.
Yeah.
Unmuted myself. There we go. So that's really interesting to me about upstate New York, because it's absolutely one of my favorite places to visit. I had the opportunity to have a friend up there about a decade ago, and I spent quite a bit of time, around Lake Seneca, not too far from, I guess, where you are. And It was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, just the views you would get just touring from winery to winery. But I guess that's the difference between living somewhere and, visiting as vacation mentality.
Yeah, so I still have family who now live outside of Rochester, and some of my happiest moments going back home to visit is driving through farmland, open land. It's just kind of country roads and rolling hills. It's beautiful, and it makes me so happy. There is a running joke that I think I heard for the first time when I was going to school in Ithaca, which is very much true for people who grew up and live in that portion of the state. That it's basically like October through April is the price of admission for everything else during the year, where you just deal with the cold and the gray and the snow, because once you hit spring, you are really, really happy to be there. And it's one of those kind of those childhood memories where, I'm glad that I grew up there in a way that I never would have thought as a child. Am I happy that I live in North Carolina? Absolutely. But there's a lot of things that you don't realize as a kid that you come to really appreciate as an adult. And it's both like, it's just this very visceral feeling of going home and driving 15 minutes through this green open space. There's a level of happiness and calm that just cannot be replicated, even when I'm living in this place like Durham, North Carolina, which I absolutely love.
So you talk about green spaces, and I know we've been so isolated through all this pandemic. What have you found to be relaxing for you and to kind of help you escape all the, frustrations and negativity and just challenges of the current state of the world? Is there that escape that you like to go to?
Yeah, man, it's not been good. I am a very social person. I do well by seeing and interacting with people in person. So I had both the fortune and the awkward timing of moving into a new home last April, just as things really fully kind of shut down. So I spent a lot of time with worthy distractions those first few months, just kind of trying to manage living in a new space and making my home a home. But yeah, after that, it was just really hard. I actually started thinking, it was probably about September, October last year, of how I was going to have to be proactive to start dealing with winter and not being able to go out and interact with people in the world in the same way. So like one of the first things I did beginning of fall was I ordered a sun lamp, or the SAD lamps, just because we're lucky where we get a lot of sunshine here, but I was very aware of like what the fact of being inside all day, there were some days where I'd walk outside of the mailbox and that's it. So, a hobby in a way was just trying to find a way to stay proactive. I've got a basement, so I'm lucky enough where I had space which became a home gym, which I'm very, very thankful for, and I'm lucky to have. But yeah, it's just like, I'm also, unfortunately, like I was just found myself doing more work. Like I have my work day during the day with Duke. And then, sometimes in the mornings, usually in the evenings, I'm doing stuff as part of the North American Guild of Beer Writers or Good Beer Hunting. And a lot of it's just trying to manage time and figure out, like, this is just something I feel like everyone else is dealing with, right? It's like once we've been forced into the box of life in the pandemic, a literal box of our home, as well as just how we exist with everything else, it really is just trying to find those spaces of wiggle room where we can find moments of joy and comfort that oftentimes we have to create for ourselves. It was really hard for a while. But now, like, I'm lucky because it's like it's spring here now. Like, we're a week away maybe from kind of normal spring season here in North Carolina, which again opens things up a lot more.
No, I agree with everything you're talking about, because everything has become more intentional, whether it's us talking about how often people are going to breweries or how often you and I are working out or going outside. You have to be more dedicated to your time and kind of make yourself have that routine and take the time for you just to escape that, constant workload, because it's so easy to just dive in early, stick around late, because that's all we have right now when we don't have all those, more human interactions. But I want to kind of talk a little bit more about what you do at Duke, because you moved from, your home in upstate New York all the way down to the South in North Carolina, which isn't too far from me. You're probably about 3.5 hours from me. So my closest person to chat with in a little bit of time. So what did you move to North Carolina for? What did the job entail at Duke?
Not working for a newspaper.
Well, let's go on that for a second. What were you frustrated with working at the paper?
The same thing that I think you'll hear from any newspaper reporter, that, I was working more than 40 hours a week. I was getting paid for 40 hours a week. I had quotas and goals to hit every week for stories. There were very, very late nights into early mornings because of it. Like, the flip side is so that's nothing uncommon you'll hear from a newspaper reporter. Neither this sentence that I loved it. Like, I enjoyed it. It made me a better writer. I enjoyed existing in communities, meeting people I never would, and trying to tell stories that are really hard. Like, I'm never going to forget the first assignment that I had where I had to cover someone who died. Like, I was working for the Finger Lakes Times at the time. This is a community newspaper based out of Geneva, New York, my hometown. And I would spend my winter and summer breaks from college working full time as a general assignment reporter. This is many years ago. And there was I think he was a teenager who was killed. And as part of helping with the reporting, I was asked to go try to talk with the family. It was really awkward
Wow.
We're talking at that time, I was probably 19 or 20 years old, but this is something everyone's got to cut their teeth with. This is an unfortunate, difficult, awkward situation every reporter has to deal with. And so it was one of the things, like, I tried calling the family on their landline and was, turned down to reasons that were perfectly legitimate. They didn't want to talk to a reporter, didn't want to talk to me. But then I went over to the house a couple days later just to kind of, to present myself that I'm not just a voice on the phone. I think what ended up happening, they said no, and I left a note. This is another thing that reporters will do, where leave a handwritten note, basically just writing out, why it was that I wanted to talk to them, and here's my number if you'd like to talk to me. I don't think I ever heard from them, because I don't remember anything beyond that moment, standing outside in their gravel driveway, having left that note on the door handle for them. So yeah, it was stuff like that. I enjoyed what I was doing. I was working for Messenger Post newspapers, was the group that I had worked for before I moved to North Carolina. I was covering suburbs, Brighton and Pittsburgh, as well as the occasional help with some coverage for the city of Rochester. And again, like that was really worthwhile, you know, in terms of a writing career and ability to make me better, because it was covering school boards and town boards and soft features and hard news and stories of immigration raids and speed bumps being installed. Like it's everything else. And I'll give a plug here to Will Cleveland, an amazing reporter for the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester, New York, who splits his time covering both the police beat, breaking news, as well as the beer scene in and around Rochester. I think if anybody might have like a similar feeling to what I remember at that point in my life, like Will's the one, because he splits his time between those worlds very often, where you have really, really serious, important news. Will's done incredible reporting around police violence, protests, the death of Daniel Prude, alongside this incredible enterprise reporting for the beer scene in and around Rochester too. And I think that's really indicative of what it's like for newspaper reporters these days. It swings, you know, whatever your beat is, especially during, you know, the pandemic, it's going to be all over the place at times. And it's your job to compartmentalize at times and be able to swing back and forth between those things.
Now, we're going to dive into your beer writing shortly, but do you believe these early days and these tough assignments, you know, at the newspaper, like the one you just talked about, does that get you more comfortable about handling those tough topics? Because you dive into a lot of, you know, often uncomfortable topics and important critical issues in the craft beer world these days. But do you believe your years in the newspaper kind of helped prepare you for the writing you do today?
Yeah, I mean, there is a muscle memory component to it, that you just have to be put in enough strange, awkward situations that it can become something of a second nature. Or maybe not even a second nature, so much as that you either become comfortable or numb to that awkwardness. Because, you know, whether at a newspaper or at a magazine that I've worked with or peers and friends now, there are plenty of people who are fantastic reporters who maybe are a little more introverted. And those, you know, cold calls can be difficult. So, yeah, I think it was, you know, from the time I was I think it was 17 when I started I was broadcasting high school and college sports. And I did that from the time I was 17 to about almost 24. So it was before I left to move down to North Carolina. That and newspapers, you know, my job every single day was to interact with people I didn't know or try to find a way to connect with them in some way. So that's a benefit and an unfortunate side effect that I just had to feel weird in all of the right ways. Like I should feel weird and awkward and hesitant approaching someone who's had a family member who's died. Or I should feel a little awkward approaching, you know, a 6'9" power forward for the local college basketball team who's like 3 times my size.
What are you, about 5'2", 5'3"?
I'm lucky enough, if I stretch really well in the morning, I'm 5'10".
You're a little bit taller than me.
5'10" and 100 pounds soaking wet. That's Bryan Roth.
So you never wanted to pursue more of a career in the sports, you know, broadcasting side? I mean, I guess you made the choice when you came to Duke, but that never crossed your mind?
No, I mean, I did. I still have friends who are doing broadcast work, all of who are also far more talented than I am or was. It really came down to choice of work-life balance, even though like the picture I paint for those in the time of my newspapers is fair, and one that I willingly chose. The thing that always, I think, made it tough for me to want to commit fully to doing radio work was being beholden to moving constantly where the work was found. And so, you know, my dream growing up was to be a broadcaster. I wanted to do play-by-play for baseball on the radio. And that means, you know, I find a job with a low-level minor league team. You know, if I'm lucky, I spend 6 months there, and then I need to find another job. And you really do spend a lot of time job hunting. So while it's something that I loved, going to even, spring training for baseball just started this past week. And there is just something so special about putting it on TV. And right now, I'll pay half attention. I was watching a game last night when I was doing some editing and note taking for Good Beer Hunting work. There is just I'm getting goosebumps. There's just something about being in that space and hearing those sounds, baseball in particular, that just really resonate deeply with me. And I've heard it lately. I think it's just because of the function of COVID and the way it's impacted the way we get to experience sports, which is up until right now, literally not in person. I've listened to reporters talk about the sound they miss with the lights turning off. You hear the power going on or turning off, or, if you're in, say, a basketball stadium, the squeaks of the shoes, the hum of the lights when the home team has a player shooting a free throw. I'm getting goosebumps right now because I can hear it in my head. There's just something about that is so ingrained in who I am and what I appreciate about the world. There is a human level connection that is so base to me that it will forever be a part of who I am. I have a hard time listening to sports on the radio sometimes because in my head, I'm thinking, oh, here's how I would do it.
That's so interesting. So I have a background somewhat in sports. When I was 16 years old, I took a job selling snow cones at the local minor league baseball stadium here, the Norfolk Tides Stadium. And over the course of, I had a long career in food service. I went to so many baseball games over my life. But you're right. It's the little humanizing aspects, the little sounds you hear while you're at the stadium. For me, it would always be the first day of the season where I'd kind of show up at the stadium. No one else was there. You're looking at that empty field, and it's just the perfect serene moment just looking out there. It's those little moments that you just remember. So the sound of the bat for you or whatever it may be. It's just memories and connections to a part of your life you'll never forget.
Yeah, there is. I've talked about this a lot lately with people who create. There is an innate want of us to create something beautiful. And we so often think about that as something that we so plainly think of as artistic. It is a painting, it is a photo, it is a written word. But there is just something so powerful because each of us, in whatever individual way we interact with the world, ultimately what we're doing, we're trying to create beauty in some way. And and sports is such a good example of that because, football is a very violent, very scary sport with very real consequences for people who play it. That's why, the average career for a football player is 2.3 years. It's hard to get in. It's hard to stay there. But to watch, Tom Brady throw a dart pass to Rob Gronkowski in the Super Bowl, which we see as just a physical act of throwing ball from point A to point B. There's my reaction is one of those throw your hands up, oh my gosh thing, because the act of doing that brings such beauty to what the human is to be able to create physically. And even just the things that we're able to create in spoken word, which I think is part of the reason why I enjoyed broadcasting sports. Trying to literally bring a scene to life is a lot of hard work. One that I spent a lot of time at and definitely could have been better at too. But it's just there is a connection to it. We all have that thing. And I think it'd be silly of us to think of that thing as anything more than just a random occurrence or consequence of our existence in the world.
A few weeks ago, probably earlier this year even, I was listening to one of your episodes of the North American Guild of Beer Writers, and not doing justice because I don't remember who the presenter was, but they were talking about the value of audio and how, you have to understand that sometimes you and I are seeing each other right now, but we might have listeners after the fact who are listening. And sometimes it's very valuable to describe everything that you're seeing and saying at such a basic level. That way the listener can literally just close their eyes and see exactly what you're seeing. And that kind of really stuck with me. I guess it kind of goes hand in hand with the play-by-play you've done.
Yeah. That might have been Ashley Rodriguez, who I worked with. She's a former producer for Good Beer Hunting, also produces Boss Barista, which is a coffee-focused newsletter and blog too. This so over my shoulder, which I had pointed at before with other Bryan. I'll give a shout out to Ashley in particular for this. So this Cherokee Rose thing, I think you might be able to see that. I wrote a story for BeerAdvocate in 2017, if I remember correctly. That ended up, it was like a page or two away from a regular monthly feature BeerAdvocate had, where it was a highlight of a brewery, and that brewery was Southern Brewing Company, whose one of the owners is Bryan Roth. And somebody made a joke about, on Twitter, it was a blogger who would cover Georgia beer, Georgia on Tap. I apologize, I cannot remember their name. Who made a joke about us, and so there was a tweet back and forth between the three of us acknowledging our existence, and then Athens Bryan Roth sent me an email in 2018. I think it was February 2018. Just like saying hello, asking me if I'd be interested in doing a collaboration beer someday. We had a couple like back and forth, like, yeah, that'd be really cool. And he shared this idea where he wanted to collect wild yeast up and down the Appalachian Trail and use that. Cherokee Rose is a Hefeweizen that uses yeast cultivated from a flower native to Georgia. And so it ended after a few emails. I promise I'm getting to the point talking about audio. It ended after a few emails, and then almost a year to the day, he wrote me an email back, said, hey, do you want to do this collaboration beer thing? And so I wrote to Ashley Rodriguez and I said, here's the thing that's happening. Could we make an audio documentary out of this? And so what I did was we ended up making the beer. I started collecting audio over the course of, it was probably about 6 to 8 months between going down to Georgia to meet Bryan and his team, did interviews there. It was collecting sound of my drive down there, like doing an audio blog basically in my car, talking to a microphone, collecting sound of Bryan sending me, it was like a 60-pound box of these sample beers.
Did you and Bryan know each other outside of the interview? Do you have any personal relationship?
We had never met each other aside from those emails. And so it was like I was collecting audio all along the way because, this really is the power of audio. One of the reasons why I love that format. We ended up turning into an hour-long audio documentary, which was about the beer, but also like ultimately, I promise I'm not trying to make this the cliche.
It's fascinating.
It really was about the friends you made along the way. Because it was this weird thing where it started out, and this is again like the random occurrences I was talking about. I had a story that for whatever arbitrary reason was placed on a layout of BeerAdvocate magazine within enough proximity to Bryan, which led to the connection via Twitter, which led to that email, to his follow-up email a year later. And Bryan, Bryan and I haven't talked. It's probably been maybe about 9 months. We connected right at the beginning of the pandemic. But it's like, I know Bryan, who is an amazing human being, will be my friend and is my friend. And I know that is an experience that I will never get to replicate. And so the random aspects of those consequences, like, man, it's just so much better. It's so much better when thinking about that as like, there are things that happen there because they should have. And there's a reason why I got to know Bryan. And there's a reason why I can now say, yes, audio storytelling can be really, really powerful because there's so much that happens in the world around you that we capture anyway. We make TikToks about random stuff in our lives that we're creating something beautiful to somebody that somebody's going to watch and laugh at and have happiness over it, or is going to make them think about something they're doing or find a beer that's going to make them happy. Like, how awesome is that? That's pretty cool.
That's freaking awesome. And I think during the pandemic, those little things are even more awesome. And I absolutely love that story. You know, I have to listen to that documentary because it sounds fascinating. Just the fact that you took the time to document it, that's just neat in itself, that you knew there was some value in these small experiences, whether just for you or a future audience, but there was a neat way that you could capture it along that path.
Yeah, I think I spent a lot of time. The last year has made me super sensitive to the on this day reminders from social media and my cloud drives for photos. The moments that I have been documenting, the things I've been writing, it blows me away that even though Facebook has all of my personal information, you know, it's a comfort level I created a long time ago, knowing that 20 years from now, you know, if I'm lucky, I will be able to pull up the photos that I had from driving down to Georgia in May of 2019 on a whim. And I know there is so much lousy stuff that has happened, especially in the past calendar year, as we're talking in now March 21. But like, I guarantee you, this conversation we're having right now is going to live on in my memory, like a digital footprint, and something that I'm going to look back on. And like, that's wild. That really is wild. Not thinking about it in terms of like the thing that we posted for engagement that day, but like, there's just something, the stupid jokes that I made on Twitter, you know, the interactions that I got to have that I get to remember. There's a post that my sister, I have a younger sister, who I had an on this day reminder from Facebook of something really stupid that like she jokingly posted on my wall 11 years ago. And that was an excuse to like say hello to my sister. Hey,
so do you feel obligated though to social media? I mean, you see the value in looking back and seeing the memories from all these past years. Do you feel an obligation to post today, tomorrow, in the future? That way you have these memories in future times?
No, I don't feel an obligation. And it's really weird too, because this is the curse of it too. Like, I made a stupid joke last night about the Geico commercial with Tag Team. Scoop, there it is, for those who maybe aren't familiar. I made a joke about it because like, it's something stupid that's been sitting in my mind for weeks now. If you've seen it, we know the beginning of the commercial. It is French vanilla, Rocky Road, chocolate peanut butter, cookie dough. Scoop, there it is, right? But the thing that gets me about that commercial, I think this gets back to a lot of like what I've just said for the last 10 minutes, is one of the members of Tag Team, the literal last scene of the commercial is him yelling, "Sprinkles!" And he throws sprinkles into the air in a moment of pure unbridled joy. That's what I remember about that commercial. Not like Tag Team, who I remember from like a middle school dance, you know? But yeah, like, I'm happy now that next year I'm going to look at that stupid joke I made about sprinkles being the real joy topping that we deserve from that commercial. Like, I'm going to look back at that and laugh. And I think that's really important. Like, there's a lot. I have a really hard time doom scrolling, you know? And so there are times I have to like make the choice to step away from social media because that's a big reason why I feel like I do not have an obligation to do it for my own sanity. And that's something we should all do occasionally. But
oh
man,
my God,
I logged onto Twitter and made a stupid joke last night.
One of my best moves that I've made is I turned off Facebook notifications on my phone, because anytime I see them pop up, I would feel the need just to check what's going on in Crappy Professionals. What are my friends doing right now? And just having that break and not seeing those little images pop up telling me to check my phone has been really valuable to me. And I think mental health during this pandemic, it's been nice to have those breaks. So how do you force yourself though to get off social media? Because you're so active. I mean, you do so many different projects, whether it's your writing, whether it's the guild, whether it's Twitter, Facebook. How do you make yourself step away sometimes, Bryan?
Yeah, I don't.
Do you want to? Is that a goal of yours to spend less time?
I should clarify, because I think this is the important thing to show how bad this is that the times I'm most quiet on social media, it's when I just got too much stuff going on. And like, I have to pay attention to other things, and I just simply cannot do a little scroll to see the latest news. Yeah, it's really bad. One of the things I think that is really important for me, and it's taken until a year going into the pandemic, is recognizing the necessity of setting my own boundaries, of which I'm really, really bad at. Because there's a lot that I do, and there's a lot that I do that brings me happiness, that comes at the detriment at times of my own work-life balance. So like my physiology, I'm terrified for what my body and mind will be like 6 months from now, when presumably I'm vaccinated and I can go exist in the world. Because the lack of interaction with my computer has really messed me up. Like I was running errands a few weeks ago. I was out for an hour and a half. Like I was delivering a friend's birthday present, and I was running a couple of errands. There's nothing out of the ordinary about this. And about an hour into it, I'm driving, I'm listening to Spotify on the radio, and my heart is racing, and I cannot figure out why. Like traffic's fine. My mind's fine. And the only thing I can think about is, in this moment, I've been away from my computer for an hour, and I'm not getting a tip from my email. I'm not looking at social media. And, at that point, we're talking, 10, 11 months of being tethered to business, personal interactions the way. There was nothing in those moments to remind me of I was accomplishing something. This is my personality in its worst way. And this is, I think, is what the pandemic has done in a way to me, where like, if I wasn't getting some kind of gratification or acknowledgement that I was accomplishing something, even as small as thing in an email, my body was telling me I was doing something wrong. And that really, like, I had to stop for like a few minutes that day to kind of think about what that meant. Because like, there were days where, I've got the day job where I'm doing stuff with Duke. I try to set aside time to exercise every single day, because that is a full-on break. But like, so I'm director of the North American Guild of Beer Writers. It's a trade organization that represents beer writers, podcasters, etc. North America primarily. We do have international members. There were days where it's like, we do online events, virtual happy hours as our like professional development and networking opportunities with interviews and stuff like that. There are days where, I've got that schedule at 7, which means I've got 30 minutes between things before I have to sit down and be on and host an interview and talk with friends. It's exhausting, but it's also like I get energy from that. And so it is really, really hard. And I think that's just one of the weird things I know many people are struggling with, is what that cutoff is, because American sensibility, like, we're so trained to find what we're doing in the world as worth. And when we don't have a break in our personal space and our professional space, what we see as worth isn't always what we consciously are aware of. And I am happy I think I figured that out. I'm not happy it took me, 10, 11 months to get to that point. But now it's just a matter of just trying to be better about it.
I think we all have room for improvement, because it's definitely been an adjustment the past year. So with regard to all the hats you wear, do you allocate certain hours of the day for, Duke University work versus the guild work versus good beer hunting versus any other thing you're working on? How do you divide your day up typically, or does your day kind of divide you up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a normal, 8 to 5-ish with the stuff. I work in marketing and communications for the health system at Duke now. And then, sometimes it's morning beforehand. Oftentimes it's evenings. Occasionally a lunch break, where it's just finding in time to take notes or pull and look at data or do some editing. This gets to the point of just oftentimes being bad about recognizing the boundaries that I should set for myself, because it's just trying to get everything done as fast as I can whenever I have time. And sometimes it gets to 9 or 9:30 at night, and I just have to tell myself, no, to close the computer and stare at a basketball game for 30 minutes.
It's good to have that thing to watch on TV that just takes your mind completely away from everything else. And I don't even know how you have time in the day to do everything that you do, let alone all your beer projects, but with a full-time job. I mean, I can only imagine, that mental break is definitely well-deserved. But I want to go kind of turn it towards your beer writing for a sec. When did you decide to make that your focus? Because we talked a lot about, what you did to get to where you are in Carolina right now, but when did beer come into your life?
So I moved to North Carolina August of 2008, which was about a year and a half after the state had changed its laws to allow for the sale of beer above 6% ABV. And so my arrival here kind of coincided with the very early stages of the craft beer boom. I think North Carolina would probably still be considered probably one of if not one of the top states in the Southeast. Certainly, we're over 200 breweries in the state. And so I was enjoying beer in a new way as things were growing in North Carolina. My State Farm representative, I met him when I first moved here, and then I ran into him 3 times at beer festivals in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so the first time was like, hey, I know you, how are you doing? Second time, it was kind of, I bumped into him in a line. And so we just chatted as we were waiting for a sample. And the third time it was finally like, maybe we should just hang out for a bit. So what happened was he was a home brewer. I started home brewing with him. And I also had started a blog at the time, which began as it was, as so many others at that point in time, 2011, 2012, it was like a track. It was like my Untapped. I was tracking the things that I was drinking and trying to write coherent things about what it was like. But
what was your blog called back then?
What's that?
What was the blog called?
The blog was and still is, This Is Why I'm Drunk. Now, so I had a friend, Dan Casavaugh, went to college with Dan, who at the time was doing, he's really into cooking now, and at the time was just starting into it. He had a Facebook album titled This Is Why I'm Fat. And so I started posting things about beer, and he made a joke about, you should start a blog. So I did, and I called it This Is Why I'm Drunk. I had a very clear disclaimer in the about page that I am not writing while I am drunk. But it was also just a funny, catchy thing that I think at the time probably helped me gain some readership, for the right reasons, because I was writing stuff, and maybe hopefully not the wrong reasons because of the name.
But I do have to ask you about a specific post you put out in 2012. It seems a little contrary to the beliefs I know of the Bryan Roth today. You shared a recipe for a pumpkin spice margarita. Can you explain that one? No, I'll send you the link later. I found that on your blog earlier today. I had to go back in the Internet Wayback Machine to find that. I was digging deep, but it was from How Stuff Works. Make a pumpkin spice margarita, that recipe that you shared on your blog.
This is entertaining. Okay, I'm gonna look it up. It's not entertaining.
I'll send you the link later. We don't need to dive into pumpkin spice margaritas or anything.
Don't look it up, Brian. Sure. That seems like something I could have posted. I'm not going to deny it.
But you've been writing in beer so long, so it probably took time for you to figure out the voice you wanted to have, the topics you wanted to cover. Have your topics that you've dove into over the years taken a more serious vibe rather than just, what you're drinking?
Yeah, that's the good thing is I don't think that it took me long to try to figure out what that voice was, because maybe it was 100 posts in, and mind you, 100 posts of like little small things. The newspaper reporter in me just kind of took over a little bit. So I started what happened, and here's the reason why we're talking today, is that, I am forever curious. The idea of why is something that I think is really, really important, and my mind always cannot turn off. This is a line from my dating profile that I used to use, which is absolutely still accurate, is that I like asking questions. I love listening, which is like an honest to goodness truth, not just something to find dates with wonderful human beings. But what happened was with my blog is I started looking at sociocultural things that were happening in beer, and what were the ways that I could tell those stories that other people were. And that kept on turning back to data-focused stuff. So I was pulling information from Rate Beer, BeerAdvocate, Untapped. This is whatever I could find from Brewbound in terms of sales data, production data. And a lot of my most successful posts that I was doing for This Is Why I'm Drunk were using those as a base for analysis to look at the industry in ways that nobody else was. Basically to quantify what was happening with trends, brands, the way that people were drinking, thinking about drinking. Unfortunately, I think like a lot of that was true. What I was writing back then was true now. I won a couple of awards from the North American Guild of Beer Writers. This was before I was leading it. Which begat a connection with John Hall, who is longtime reporter extraordinaire, both regular news, Indianapolis Star, New York Times, and others, as well as editor within the beer world. He was editing All About Beer magazine at the time. And I got connected with John, so I started doing freelance work for All About Beer, which begat connecting with Ben Keane at BeerAdvocate, and then there were a couple of spot things with Paste and Thrillist. And it was Philadelphia 2016 at the Craft Brewers Conference. Michael Kaiser, who is the co-founder and publisher of Good Beer Hunting, connected with me like, hey, do you want to meet up? And we talked about maybe writing some stuff for Good Beer Hunting. I'm just lucky that people were reading the stories that I was writing. I'm lucky that I had the reporting background, that I had experience asking questions and writing in a way that made it made for good storytelling. And yeah, I think my first piece was published, it might have been summer of 2017, I think, for Good Beer Hunting. I did a story that my first story was a 2-part series. I think it was about why own premise, why taproom sales were going to change the beer industry. And here we are today.
And here we are today. Yeah. I mean, I absolutely love your data-driven pieces, and I always wonder, because they're so in-depth, how much time do you spend just analyzing data before you even put a word on paper?
Yeah, a lot. And there's a lot that I look at that never even turns into anything. So right now, for instance, I will pull IRI data on a weekly basis to look at different things. The 3 big areas that I always try to look at, I will do categories of beer. So that's, liquor, wine, and beer, as well as the subcategories of beer. So that's things like craft and imports, premium plus, which is effectively Michelob Ultra. I also do a poll for, it's basically just hundreds and hundreds of brands. So breweries all around the country who sell their beer in off-premise chain retail, which has become exponentially more important in the last year, the way that people have had to package their beer to sell in chain stores. So I'm looking at things every week just to see what's happening on a rolling basis. So I was really excited because I just recently pulled data that was the 52-week period ending February 21st. And the reason why that was interesting is because that now effectively covers the entirety of one full 52-week period of the pandemic.
Amazing.
And so I can see, looking back compared to the year before now, that beer as a whole really didn't do that great. But like Michelob Ultra, as always, is this like transcendent brand that was huge and only got huger during the pandemic. And so that's a lot of like, so one of the things that I think attracted me to journalism was probably because I'm a narcissist who tries not to be, in that I like telling stories and I like the truth. And I like it if I can understand what that truth is. And there ain't nothing more truthiness than numbers on a page.
Boom. Well, your background, though, I mean, you were a reporter. When did the data side come in? I mean, did you have to teach yourself how to, successfully analyze all the data sets you're diving into, or how did you kind of get that, data nerdy?
Luck, I think, a lot. So like, I think the stuff that you put out with Secret Hopper and like the analysis that you do is probably more complicated and you understand it better than I do. I think that the way that I look at data is a very manual, time-consuming process. So like, for example, with This Is Why I'm Drunk, I started doing this annual post, which I really enjoyed, but was an insane amount of work, where sometime between mid-December and mid-January every year, there's always this flood of best beer of the year lists, and this is going back to 2014, 15, 16, 17, maybe, or something like that. You find example of these all over the country with small publications, newspapers, up to national trade publications. And there was no consistency in the way that we thought about what it was and what those best beers would be. So what I started doing, I would collect as many of those lists as I possibly could, which were usually somewhere between like 25 and 40. And I would list every single beer from every single list with their style, ABV, origin, and I think I eventually got to including a rating. And I would work to normalize that by looking for patterns across all of them. So it's just going tab to tab. And what that would often do is it would lead me to better understand the style and preferences, because it's not just, elite beer judges or beer enthusiasts. It is a gamut of people from novices to, pros. And so that was I think that's a really great example of my early work of trying to figure out something from the numbers. Like, it really was just plotting everything into a spreadsheet and just looking at it for hours, comparing and saying, okay, so over the past year, I can now say a preferred ABV across the best beers was 6.5 versus the year before it was 6. So what's happening with the styles? And I got notes from people in the industry telling me this was wildly beneficial to them, because it's a collection of data that nobody else was doing that helped to drive some of the decisions that they were making and talking about with their business, which is like a great example of, like, you don't have to be anybody. You can be some lowly dude who just like has some time in a blog to produce something that changes minds. Like, you don't have to have a following and you don't have to be an influencer. Like, it's good work speaks for itself. And I love it when new people enter the industry in whatever capacity, and writing this one. And I love telling them, like, if you love it and you do good work, like, people are going to care. And I think stuff like that was really impactful for me.
In a story like the one you just mentioned, those are the kind of stories that I absolutely love to dive into, for the reason you mentioned as well. It's a data set you can't find anywhere else. And it's a conversation I have so much with just people all across the industry. It's just about the value of business in craft beer these days. And I think data goes hand in hand, obviously, with the business side of the industry. Do you see the craft beer industry getting more data focused? I mean, we're not just talking Untappd rating and things like that, but do you think the person working inside the brewery is valuing more data more so today as opposed to even, a couple of years ago?
Yes. So the easy answer is yes. I also say that slightly biased because that drives so much of the reporting that I do. So along with acting as an editor for Good Beer Hunting, I also produce a weekly newsletter that's for subscribers called Sightlines Premium, which is this, where I look at trends, I look at data, and I combine the quantitative with the qualitative to write newsletters and stories that are changing models of business for people. And now, one of the things I hear, rightfully so, is that, so I use IRI data, which I mentioned is from chain retail. It is not all encompassing. It doesn't include every single chain grocery store. So there are some gaps there. It doesn't include bars, for example. But the reason why I also think it's really valuable, it includes sales all over the country. It includes sales from a regular Jane drinker. And so, we talk about, well, whatever, Michelob Ultra is sold all over the country. So of course it just makes a lot of money because it's sold everywhere. Well, yeah, but people like it. And so the things we see happen there and what happens with other brands can certainly influence small brands too. So like Nielsen had this data point, top 25 craft brewers in production were about half of the growth in chain retail last year. The other half of that growth, they said, were small and local producers. A big part of that is because a lot of them were going into retail for the first time. So it's like, we're talking today, Deschutes just announced like a few hours ago, Brewbound news that they're buying or acquiring Boneyard in Oregon. The quote that stood out for me was the Boneyard owner was talking about the need to go from almost all draft, so bars, restaurants, and tap rooms, into package, and they weren't ready for that. So that's one part of the story. The second part of the story is, to your point exactly, is they got to get to chain retail now. And so all of a sudden, his focus on how to grow and change Boneyard is going to be based on what's happening on the data that I see. And so I think, the ability, whether or not you just look at your own sales reports, IRI is really expensive, so not everybody can have access to that. That's also like why what we do with Sightlines Premium, do an annual subscription for $600, and I get to provide data at like a fraction of the price to people that is going to help them make better decisions at a time they need to.
And I think that's why you're doing amazing things in the industry. There's so much value to the data and insight you're putting out. I know I appreciate it. So many other people appreciate it. And that's why I really just wanted to learn more about you today as a person and why you do what you do. And this has been a lot of fun, Bryan. And I know you do a lot of audio as well. And unfortunately, when people hit that 60-minute mark, sometimes they trail away. So we're going to wind down. I could talk to you forever. I hope we have another one of these, maybe a part 2 at some point in time. But we've talked a little bit about like just the simple things in life, the human interaction we miss so much. We've talked about going back on Facebook and looking at your memories from 11 years ago. So you're going to see us, next year when you look. But where do you hope you are when you're looking at that memory? Where do you think you'll be a year from now?
Man, I don't care where I am. I hope I'm smiling. That's I hope I'm smiling. Honestly.
That's simple enough. That's positive. I absolutely love it. Well, Bryan, no, this has been an absolute pleasure today. I hope a year from now we're actually meeting in person, sharing a beer at some point. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for sharing your data. Thank you for sharing your insight. And thank you for just being a little humanizing part of my day. I enjoy these small moments as well. So hopefully we're doing it face-to-face before too long.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Cool. Cheers.